Hello and welcome to the World Wanders podcast. This is Amanda and I'm going to be your host for this episode. And this is actually going to be, I guess, a little bit of a different episode than we've ever done before because I am currently on a road trip from Banff or Canmore in Alberta all the way to Atlanta where Ryan has a 9-month work visa. So I'm on my way down there in my little Pontiac all by myself to meet up with him. And so I thought, what a perfect opportunity to use this cool portable microphone that we bought ourselves, as well as a cool opportunity to share with our followers everything that, we're sort of up to in our personal lives. And it's been sort of an interesting process. Ryan's been down in Atlanta since the first week of September. And so I spent the last 3 weeks of September just on my own in Canmore, packed up our house, sold all of our stuff, and then I left from Canmore to stay in Calgary for a night on Monday, and then on Tuesday morning, it's now Thursday. On Tuesday morning, I set off for the U.S., and I was a little bit nervous to cross the border just because, my car is pretty jam-packed full. I had no idea what it was going to be like to cross the border as a tourist with so much stuff. But it's been a cool adventure. I drove for, 4 hours from Calgary to the Sweetgrass border in Montana. And I did get pulled aside for questioning, which I think is pretty typical for somebody traveling with a full car full of people who's going to meet somebody who's living there when that person doesn't have a work visa. I showed a bank statement. I made it pretty clear that I'm not planning to work in the U.S. while I'm down there, and everything went pretty smoothly, and they wished me well on my way. So from Sweetgrass, I made my way down through Great Falls, Montana, and then down into Bozeman, where my really good friend Chelsea from my yoga teacher training, we talk about in my yoga teacher training in Bali episode, that's where she lives. So I spent Tuesday night, all of Wednesday, and then most of today, which is Thursday, with Chelsea, which was pretty cool. I didn't realize that Bozeman was such a college university town, so it was neat to check that out. Kind of reminded me of Canmore in terms of like the yoga mountain scene, which was awesome. So I guess I did as the locals did, went out hiking, did some yoga, ate some delicious food. And now I am making my way from Bozeman to Brodus, Montana, which is about 4.5 hours, basically straight to the east through Billings. And then tomorrow I'm going to make my way through most of South Dakota, which I think is going to be pretty flat. Hopefully have some excitement through there, though, with Mount Rushmore and Wall Drug. So yeah, I'm excited to continue recording this episode. It'll give me something to talk about and something to do on this drive because, being in a car for 8 hours on your own, which is what I did on Tuesday, it can be pretty exhausting, despite having multiple audiobooks and podcasts downloaded. It just, it can get to be a bit much, and the last thing you want to do is turn to the distraction of your cell phone because, it's flat and it's kind of boring. That can be super, super dangerous. And driving from Calgary basically until right past Great Falls was quite straight for me. And it was actually pretty cool because between Great Falls and Bozeman, the road was pretty windy and it goes through some like rolling hills and badlands and like really cool rock formations. So I really enjoyed seeing that. And I guess one of the perks of driving as opposed to flying, which is something that Ryan and I often talk about in our podcast in general, is that you do get to see so much more scenery and you do have that freedom. So it has been nice to just like stop as I want and, I feel like a snack, I'll just stop here. I feel like just stopping and taking a photo, I'll stop here. And so I'm trying to just take in the scenery as much as I can and really take my time while at the same time make good time to Atlanta. So the total drive will be about 36 hours. I'm not too sure how many kilometers, but I feel like it's like 4,000 or something like that. Something crazy. And I have done 8 hours of it, so just about a quarter way through my drive. And then I've got 3 full days left of driving, so those will be about, 9-hour days, give or take. So that'll be I don't know. I guess maybe I shouldn't be so optimistic. Some parts are going to be pretty boring, I think. But for the most part, I'm grateful for, the fact that I've got a well-running car that'll hopefully hold up until I get down to Atlanta. And then I can just relax once I'm down there. I've been out of a place to live, though, for 8 days now. So I've been staying at people's houses, which is amazing. It's really nice when you don't have somewhere to live to see how willing people are to give you, a couch or a bed to sleep on, which it's really great to have like friends and family in your life who will do those things for you. And even things like Airbnb and couch surfing, which make travel so affordable. And so I was looking for a place to stay tonight because I was debating, do I stay with Chelsea another night, get up really early tomorrow, make the 7-hour drive to Mount Rushmore, and then try and drive further after I tour that? And that just seemed like a lot in one day, like 11 hours of driving plus touring around Mount Rushmore, excuse me. It just seemed, I don't know, like quite a bit. So it's just like, I don't think I want to do that. So I decided to leave. It's like late afternoon. It's 4:30 p.m. right now. And I didn't want to make the drive all the way to Rapid City outside of Mount Rushmore, because 7 hours in the car after a whole day. We got up early and did some yoga this morning, and then we took Chelsea's dog for a walk and grabbed lunch. So, we've been busy for most of the day, and I just felt like 7 hours on the road after that would be a lot. So luckily I found an Airbnb in Brodus, Montana, which is a super, super small town, doesn't really have much in it. So I'm looking forward to this opportunity to have, a clean, comfortable bed to stay in for a really affordable rate in this random place. So that's a pretty solid update as to where I'm at now. I'll check in again shortly and keep you guys updated on how this road trip's going for me. Hello, and welcome again to my road trip podcast. Once again, this is Amanda. And I made my way from Bozeman to Brodus, Montana yesterday. And I didn't leave until about 4 p.m. Last night. So it was a bit of a long drive for me. It was 4.5 hours, and I got there right at 9 with a stop for gas and a couple of pee breaks. And I think that was, I hope that was the hardest stretch of driving that I've got. The sun set here around 6:45, so I drove for like 2.25 hours in the dark. And I've hit a deer before, so I really don't love night driving. And although it's a highway, it's like a two lane, so 1 lane either direction, just really kind of in Montana, like right in the rolling hills of Montana. So there was definitely a lot of animals on the road. I saw quite a few like deer eating on the side. One deer had been hit. So it left me feeling a little bit, I guess, anxious that I was going to get tired and stop paying attention, or that a deer was going to run out and I wasn't going to see it and I was going to hit it in a no cell service area, which is another, interesting thing about Montana, is that they basically have cell service in like half of the state. So a lot of the time when you're driving, you don't have any cell service. And for me, as a solo female driver, that makes me a bit anxious in times where something could happen and I may need to flag somebody down. But I did stay in the town of Brodus, and I stayed at a lovely homestay with a guy named Tim and his girlfriend and his dog and his 2 little kittens. And it's always amazing to me how people really just open up their homes to people who are traveling through things like Airbnb and couch surfing. Airbnb is seriously one of the coolest things ever. So if you haven't used it while traveling, or you haven't used it in general, just use it. Like the next time you're going anywhere, like Ryan and I used it when we went to like Red Deer, which is an hour and a half north of Calgary, for a wedding. So like there's Airbnbs all over the world. You can really just use them wherever and whenever. And it's cool that somebody has the opportunity when they set up this spare bedroom to use it and make money on it and, you know, offer up their homes to people who are passing through. And he had a spare bedroom set up with a bunch of toiletries available for me and Wi-Fi, a little brochure of everything to do in the tiny town of Brodus. He made his kitchen open to me, showed me where the coffee was for the morning. And it goes from being this sort of like, oh, I'm in your home, this is uncomfortable, to welcome to my home, like, we want you here, which is pretty cool as somebody who's, you know, traveling, especially when you're alone. So I had an amazing sleep on this soft, cushy bed at Tim's house, and I woke up feeling rested and rejuvenated and ready for my road trip today. I also did wake up from a message from the person in Sioux Falls who I'd booked couch surfing with. And couch surfing, because it's free, is a little bit more, like, there's no cancellation policy. It's a little bit more fluffy than Airbnb is. So I felt a little bit disappointed because, you know, one, I've never done couch surfing before, so I thought it'd be a cool experience. And, you know, you can look at people's profiles. And so I picked somebody who seemed really interesting, who traveled South America and had a spare bedroom and that sort of thing. But that's okay. I found an Airbnb just outside of Sioux Falls. I think it's about just over a 7-hour drive from Brodus. I'm going to drive 3 hours, though, stop at Mount Rushmore, continue a little bit further, and have a stop at Wall Drug. Apparently, it's a famous drugstore, and you see signs for miles and miles, so I'm feeling pretty excited about that. And I've planned out that tomorrow I'm going to make my way from my Airbnb just outside of Sioux Falls all the way to St. Louis. So tomorrow is probably going to be my biggest day of driving. I'm going to pass through Omaha, Nebraska, Kansas City, and then down into St. Louis. I think that, you know, 9 hours of driving, it's a lot, but at the same time, I'm going to have a lot of highway driving. I'm going to stop quite a bit, I think. I'll stop in the big cities and, you know, kind of check those out a little bit. I'm also getting to my first Chipotle area because there's no Chipotle where I was in Montana. So for those of you who don't know what Chipotle is, it's like fast food Mexican, but a little bit more healthy than your average quote unquote fast food restaurant. It's kind of like Subway, but Mexican, and way better than Subway. If you haven't been, it's amazing. There's one in Vancouver. I think that's the only one in Canada, but it's all across the United States. And it is one of my favorite places to eat in the U.S. and one of the things that made me the most excited about having a small stint or a few months spent consecutively in the U.S. When I woke up this morning, I felt excited to kind of, you know, get on the microphone and just say a few things. And I think part of that is that, you know, conversation is minimal when you're on your own. There's only so much conversation you can have with people, especially when you're, you know, not in an area where there are a ton of people. So I was excited to kind of talk about my adventures and share, you know, my experience last night driving in the dark, a little bit tired. And it's kind of interesting because it's something that I promised, you know, my friends and my family as well as myself that I wouldn't do on this trip because I'm not in a rush. And I'm not in a rush, but at the same time, I'm excited to get to Atlanta and settle down because it has been over a week now that I've sort of been in limbo, and I'm excited to not be in limbo anymore. You know, one key thing about road trips is having a lot of variety in terms of what you're going to listen to. So for me, I've got an iPad stacked full of music. I've got 3 audiobooks that I downloaded, and I also had a podcast waiting for me. So I started with an audiobook, and then the sun set, and I realized that that was just not going to do it for me. I looked at my phone, calculated my distance, and realized I still had 2.5 more hours, and was like, from Billings to Brodus, and was like, oh shit, I'm tired. I want to be done driving. I don't want to be sitting anymore. So I put on some Shania Twain. I cranked it up. I sang along, and she helped me kill a solid hour, if not a little bit more. And by that point, I was ready for the podcast I had downloaded, followed by a continuation of one of my audiobooks. And with my audiobooks, I kind of strategically purchased them. So I purchased Yes Please by Amy Poehler. So super like lighthearted. She's a comedian, so she's pretty hilarious. And then I purchased Brene Brown's new book. So that one's a little bit more like research based, but still she always uses stories to teach people about her research, which is something that I love in general about her books. And then I purchased a third one called The Untethered Soul, which somebody had recommended for me to read. And I actually haven't started it yet because I feel like it's going to be probably the driest and slowest out of the 3 books. But I'll give it a go, maybe tomorrow or later today. I've got quite a few hours left ahead of me of driving. I looked on the map last night when I got to Brodus to Atlanta, and it's still, 24 hours of driving. So I'll kind of do that in 7 to 8 hour increments over the next 3 days. So without further ado, I am onwards across rolling plains, Montana, making my way into South Dakota. And so I will check in a little bit later. Good morning. It is Saturday morning. It's 8 a.m. I just left Sioux Falls. So the last time I checked in was yesterday morning, and I just left Brodus, Montana. So this time around, I'm leaving Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So from Brodus, I made my way about 3 hours or 2.5 hours to Rapid City, and then outside of Rapid City to the Mount Rushmore National Memorial. And from Rapid City, it's about 30 minutes. So, if it is something that you want to make a part of your trip, do recognize that it is going to be out of your way. Like, it's not. It is going to be about 30 minutes both ways, because it is, outside of the city, and it's past this town that's sort of like the start of a really bad Western movie called Keystone. It's like those Western sets from old movies that are like just flat. They've got buildings set up like that, but they're actual buildings. So that feels a little bit like tacky, I guess. But it's designed for tourists. There's lots of other things you can do if you want outside of just going to see Mount Rushmore. If you've got children, there's a reptile garden, or if you're like a big kid adult, reptile garden. There's a dinosaur museum. I think there's a bit of like adventure things you can do, like a scenic gondola and stuff. Being that it's mid-October at the moment, most of that stuff is actually closed, like the scenic gondola and stuff. But I'm sure in high season it's pretty busy. I was surprised by how busy Mount Rushmore was. Like, it wasn't packed, but at the same time there were people pretty much everywhere I went at the memorial. So I was fine with the amount of busyness that was there. It's interesting because as you make your way through Keystone, and then it's about 2 miles further from that is the actual memorial, and you kind of just round a corner and all of a sudden there it is on the side of a mountain. And my first thought was, I thought it would be bigger, which I think is super, super typical of these really, really talked up sort of like touristy things. Like, I know for Ryan and I, when we were in Australia and we went to go see the Big Banana, I still thought it was a massive banana. When you take into account the size of a real life banana, it's pretty big. But Ryan was like pretty unimpressed with the size of the Big Banana, considering they say it's big. Anyways, I had this moment of like, okay, I thought that Mount Rushmore might be bigger. But it's, you continue going up and then you park. And so the monument is actually free, but they charge for parking, so it's not really free. But, they make people feel good about going because they say, we let you go to the monument for free and we only charge for parking. Anyways, mini rant there. That just annoys me because it's like, let's just be real about the fact that it's not free. It's not a free activity. But I was fine paying $11 for it. I feel like it was worth my $11 to pay and walk around. it's a really well done memorial. I kind of had this idea in my mind that there might be those like cardboard cutouts that you can stick your head in and you can be one of the presidents. But I think because it is this like national symbol type thing, they've really ensured that that doesn't happen, which I think is good. It's pretty cool though. When you go to the memorial, there's a bunch of exhibits you can go and look at, and you can learn about the artist. His name is like Lincoln Glaucom. I'm pretty sure he's Dutch. But it's pretty cool because he spent a lot of time designing what it was going to look like in 1/12 the size. So they designed this like small statue version of Mount Rushmore, which you can go see there. And then they created plaster sets of each of the faces to hang up so that they had something to work off of while they were up there. And then they made it from there. And it's cool because like throughout the exhibits you can kind of learn the actual process. So something that's interesting that I hadn't considered is that with rock you have to be really careful, because if you chip too much away, it's nearly impossible to put any back. So they used this process where they drilled holes like directly beside each other, but like the same distance apart beside and below, and they made these like grids with holes to soften the rock before they chipped away, because it gives you more like mobility with the rocks, and so you're able to like shape them a little bit better, I guess. And then, you know, it was done in the late 1920s, 1927 I think, and it took a few years to complete, and they did sort of one president at a time. So George Washington was done first, and then Abraham Lincoln, then Thomas Jefferson, and then Roosevelt. I'm pretty sure that's the fourth one. Or maybe Roosevelt and Jefferson are the other way around. I think that actually might be right. So they did like one at a time, and each of the four of them was done for a particular reason and stands for a particular, you know, different thing, like freedom, democracy, etc., etc. And so as I kind of just like lost track of my thoughts. One thing about podcasting while driving is that you still have to focus on the road. So it's really easy to get like lost in what you're thinking about when you hit a patch of construction like I just did. And something that's really different between the US and Canada is they'll lower the speed limit from like 80 miles an hour, so like about 130 kilometers an hour on the interstate, to 65 miles an hour in construction zone. So it's still, you're still going like, or I'm still driving like 100 kilometers an hour, which is like pretty fast when there's people working and there's these like orange pylons everywhere. That's just something I've observed while being down here. But I'm not going to complain about the fast freeway speed limits, because I like to drive fast and I want to get to Atlanta faster than, 60 miles an hour. Anyways, back to Mount Rushmore. So it was in the late 1920s that they did it, and so they hung from these like chair contraptions from the top of the mountain, and there's photos you can see in the exhibits that are set up, and it's freaky. Like, it reminds me of those window cleaners that are hanging from massive buildings in cities, and they're just like kind of swinging precariously. And there's photos of these people, like, they use their feet to leverage their, like, pickaxe thing that digs at the rock. And so all they have to go on is these plaster molds beside them. And then there was these, like, beams put at the very top. And they pointed in different angles so that they could really be accurate about how far apart they needed to put everything. Like, it's interesting because it's so real looking, and they did such a spectacular job in terms of that. And when you think about hanging off the side of a mountain and trying to carve an eyeball in, you have to have some sort of idea as to how far away you need to go to make the other eyeball, because you don't have that view from a distance. You're right up there. And one of their noses is like like 16 feet. So it's, two different people put together, like two tall people. So it's, I don't know, it's pretty crazy. Like, although it doesn't look, it looks really well done, but it looks like faces of 4 presidents in a mountain. It's actually like, a lot of work's been put into it, obviously, and they took a lot of time. And it's very, very, like, smooth. So I can't remember what it said in the exhibit, but there's actually like a way that you can make it smooth. So it's not coated with anything. It's just a different way that you sort of like brush the rock after it's been chipped away. And it's interesting because when you're there, you can go to this viewpoint and there's like an amphitheater there. I think they put on talks and stuff. And then you can also go on this little presidential walk and learn about the presidents. It's about 0.6 of a mile. It's not difficult. But as you get closer, it's pretty cool because you kind of look up at them and you can really get like more of a concept as to how big that like mountain face is and how big the carvings are. And it's cool too because you go, and I was observing the eyeballs, and so it's these like dug out holes, and then the pupils are actually like cut into, like the way you would a jack-o'-lantern. So it's like you've cut into everything and you've dug it out outside of the pupil. And it looks a bit strange when you just look at that from right below, but it's super cool when you look from afar because I feel like it gives it that really like real look. So I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed going to Mount Rushmore. It's interesting because it's something I've always wanted to do, but it's never been like, or see, but it's never been like bucket list item. Like I would never have just driven to South Dakota to see it. But if you are driving through South Dakota, I would definitely pay it a visit. I feel like it's worth the time and the money, and especially if you're on a long road trip like me, getting out and walking even 0.6 of a mile was amazing because it's hard to, convince yourself to take that time when you're on a long road trip to like stretch your legs and get some blood flow. And I feel like it's so important. Hopefully I'm not getting a blood clot as we speak, as I hop in this car again for another 9 hours. So from Mount Rushmore, I think I spent about an hour and a half there. I didn't rush. I really took my time. I explored the gift shop. I didn't rush at all. So hour and a half was my time frame there. And then I made my way back along the eastern side of Rapid City. Like I skipped the actual city center and I drove towards Wall, which is like a tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota, and it's famous for Wall Drug. So I had heard about this before I even left. So if you are driving through South Dakota, I would definitely look this up. It is probably one of the weirdest things you'll ever encounter. Signs for Wall Drug start like 40 miles out, and it's not just like one on the side of the road, because billboards are really big here too. So it's not just one billboard like every 2-3 miles. It's like they're positioned 10 feet from the side of the highway, and then they're 20 feet and 30 feet, and they're kind of just like zigzagged all over the place in random locations. Their big thing is that they offer free water, and they do 5-cent coffee, homemade pies and donuts. If you're a Vietnam veteran or a honeymooner, you can get free coffee and a donut there. And then it also advertises all this other things like they sell. So camping equipment, pharmacy, Western wear, Western decorations, candy. Like it's crazy, and just like kind of these quirky, funny signs to try and get people to stop. I really wanted to take a picture of all of them really, but at least a few of them. It's really difficult though when you're driving 130 kilometers an hour on a highway, and the highway didn't really have a really big shoulder, so I felt like it was probably not the best or smartest move to pull over to try and take a picture of a Wall Drug sign. So I turned off the interstate to go and explore this Wall Drug that I had heard was cool and had been advertised for 40 miles out, which obviously their advertising works because I get into the town, there's not really anything else there except this massive building that says like wall drug, like travelers welcome, locals welcome, everyone welcome. And it's packed. Like, parking on the street is packed. And I feel like I'm a bit in shoulder season too. They've got this overflow parking lot as you drive into town. And I feel like it's probably just jam-packed in the middle of summer, which is like, it's actually pretty crazy that that's, you know, a thing. So I go in, I don't really know what to expect. And I walk in and it's like another scene from a bad Western movie. And I'm like, what is happening in here? You walk in this building and like they've created like this Western street, but inside a building. So there's like all these benches with these like plaster figures of like men and women, like Western men and women. And there's these like shop windows that have these like plaster statues or plastic statues that are like singing and playing really bad country music. And you can get like boots, or you can get candy, or you can get books, or you can get pictures. What else could you get? Yeah, there's an actual pharmacy that you can go into, and then you kind of like walk through. So the right side just has all these stores, and then on the left you can kind of walk through past these areas, and you go into like this massive gift shop, like wall drug everything. It was crazy. I'm kind of a sucker for gift shops. I've like learned to refrain from buying stuff from moving so much, which is something that I think we touched on in one of our other podcasts on packing and having less stuff. But it's something that Ryan and I both struggle with in different realms. Like, he doesn't love souvenir stuff as much as he loves like books, for example. But I like to just kind of like collect stuff. It's like, ooh, I was here, I should buy like a keychain or a mug or a spoon or a postcard. I've got so much of all of that stuff, so I'm learning not to do that. And then, so you continue past the gift shop, and there's this cafe, and you can get like homemade pies and donuts and deep fried everything and 5-cent coffee, and I just was not feeling that. So I just kind of like wandered around a little bit. I explored, took a selfie with like a super creepy plastic thing. I can post that photo in the show notes. Yeah, I just took a bunch of photos, kind of just tried to like take it all in with an open mind, despite feeling like it was super, super strange, which I think it is. But good for the little town of Wall for turning, you know, nothing into something. So if you're driving through South Dakota, it's like probably one of the flattest drives you'll ever do. Kind of like driving through Saskatchewan or Manitoba, which makes sense because South Dakota is, you know, obviously south of North Dakota, but south of Manitoba as well. It's definitely worth the stop. Like, it's worth stretching your legs. It's like a pretty hilarious experience. If you do really like buffalo burgers and like homemade pies and cheap coffee, then stop there for lunch or dinner for sure. Definitely an interesting experience. So from there, I hopped into the car. It was probably like 2:30, 2:45 by the time I left Wall. Stuck on my GPS, had about 4 hours from there to get to Sioux Falls, where I was staying for the night. And Sioux Falls is on like the very eastern portion of South Dakota. So I basically conquered all of South Dakota yesterday, which is, you know, pretty cool. I didn't realize though that I was going forward an hour. I should have thought about it, since obviously Saskatchewan and Manitoba would be an hour ahead. But so I lost an hour in there, so I didn't end up getting into Sioux Falls until like 7:45 at night. I was pretty hungry. I hadn't actually stopped for a real meal since I left Chelsea from like lunchtime when I was at Chelsea's house. Road snacks, I'm telling you, key to a fast road trip. And I don't just stock up on like chips and chocolate and that sort of thing. Like, I had Vega bars for 2 meals and some like really delicious gluten-free granola and some like raw ginger snaps. And I mean, to each his own. That's just sort of like what I prefer because I actually get some energy out of them. But I was definitely ready to like munch down on some real food by the time I got to Sioux Falls. And unfortunately, they don't have a Chipotle, so I went to a different sort of like Chipotle-style restaurant called Qdoba or Qdoba. I'm not too sure. It was good. I mean, I'm always going to be a Chipotle fan, and I'm going to go to Chipotle today. But at the same time, like, Qdoba was great, and I really enjoyed it. And the area that I was in actually had like a health food grocery store kind of across the street, and I got in there right before they were closing, so I was able to stock up on some more snacks for today, which is amazing. One of my things in, I guess, like life in general is that I don't usually go anywhere without a snack, and so that's definitely like a road trip thing for me as well, because you never really know how far you might need to go before there's food, and there's nothing worse than like sitting there feeling hungry, being grumpy, feeling miserable, and just like not enjoying yourself. So having some like guilt-free good snacks in the car, especially if you're tired or that sort of thing, I think is really good. So after that, I made my way to my Airbnb, and so I think I mentioned yesterday I was supposed to do some couch surfing last night, but the guy messaged me yesterday morning and said that he had to take a last minute business trip to Minneapolis. So unfortunately that didn't work out. And I mean, I think couch surfing is an amazing service. I think it's too bad that there's like no, tie for people. Like, so for Airbnb, somebody's making money off of you and you're paying money to them. So you're both like really invested in that situation. So you're not going to just bail on them, which I think is pretty great. And I guess that's like part of what happens when there's free services. So it is what it is. It was fine. It worked out really well. I ended up staying in like the suburb of Harrisburg, which is like just outside of Sioux Falls. And I stayed with a really nice couple named Denton and Lacey in their house. I got there before they were home. She'd given me their garage code. And it's kind of funny how people, I mean, maybe not funny is the right word, but it's interesting how people are so willing to open up their homes to a stranger. Because it's like, for those of you who have never used Airbnb, if you're a bad guest, they can actually leave a review for you. So say I went there and I destroyed the bed and I stole something from them and I made a mess in their kitchen, they're going to leave me a really bad review. Like, they're going to leave me, 1 star, she was terrible, this is what happened, and I can't edit this review. And it's something that somebody will look at the next time I go to book. And like vice versa with them. So if their bed's dirty, if their house is messy, if they don't communicate, if she hadn't given me the garage pin and they weren't home and I had to sit outside for an hour before they got home, like all that stuff is stuff that you leave in this review, sort of the same way like TripAdvisor works. And so it's really like, there's accountability on both sides for both people to be, to be reliable and to provide a good service. And it's something that I really love about Airbnb. So I got a room, I stayed in their room last night for like $50 a night, probably at least 1/3 of what hotels were in Sioux Falls. And everyone I've ever stayed with at Airbnb is so great. They want you in their home. They're very welcoming for guests. They're excited to meet somebody from another part of the world. They are always hospitable. Like, she left me out a towel and some shampoo and conditioner. Just like a few little snacks, which I actually forgot to take. But just like, it's just a great experience. Like, I just can't recommend it enough. I don't really know what else I wanted to say about that, but I had a really, really good sleep, and so I'm ready today this will be my biggest day of driving. I'm driving 9 hours, so I'm making my way from Sioux Falls down to St. Louis. So far the drive is super straight, and I was hoping that it might be a little bit more exciting than just straightness, but I think it's gonna get I'm driving through Omaha and Kansas City and then into St. Louis, which is a massive city. So I think it's going to be a bit of a change of pace in terms of traffic and people, because since being in Bozeman, which is a city of 40,000 people, I've basically just been through small towns, really small towns. And that's kind of, what eastern Montana and South Dakota is like. Sioux Falls is definitely the biggest place that I encountered, and I kind of just passed by that. So I'm excited to eat at Chipotle. I'm excited to be getting south. I'm hoping that the weather warms up because it was chilly in Sioux Falls this morning, and that maybe tomorrow will be a short stay. Tomorrow is going to be St. Louis to Nashville to Atlanta, so about 8.5 hours, so not that much less than today. But then I'm going to be in my new home, which will be pretty exciting. And I can't believe that I've just talked for 25 minutes. Apparently I needed to, talk out loud. Oh, another great thing about Airbnb, especially if you're a solo traveler, and what's great about the U.S., so if you're a solo traveler and you're a lower budget person, hostels just aren't really a thing in this country. So business venture for all you Americans out there, start a hostel for travelers. And it can get a little bit lonely. So it's I'm listening to some great audiobooks, like I mentioned in the other, yesterday and the day before. But audiobooks, it's kind of one way, you're just listening, you're not talking. And what I'm finding is I go into a gas station and I say hello, but it's you don't get much further than hey, how's it going? How's your day? With a guest attendant, or at least I haven't so far. So something that's great about Airbnb is that, if you can meet your hosts, if they're around, I visited with Denton and Lacey for a little bit last night. It's really nice to just converse. Humans are social creatures, as much as we may alone time and maybe introverted, we still, crave that human connection after a while. So that's something that's really good about Airbnb versus staying in hotels where you really don't have any human interaction. And it's nice to be in a home. It doesn't feel as or at least to me, it doesn't feel as uncomfortable and on the road. It just feels more like you're staying in your parents' house or your grandma's house, that sort of thing, family or friends' guest room, as opposed to, being in a cold, bare hotel. Anyways, I've almost made it from Sioux Falls to Sioux City in this time. Looking forward to seeing how the rest of this drive goes and hoping that this landscape gets a little bit less wheat fieldy and flat and a little bit more exciting. But I will keep you posted and update you on how the drive is going. Hello and welcome back. Today is Sunday and day 6 of my road trip. So I technically didn't drive one of the days I was in Montana, but still it's been 6 days since I left Canada, and I've been making my way slowly down to Atlanta, and today's the day where I'll finally get there, assuming that everything goes to plan. Yesterday from Sioux Falls, I drove through Sioux City in Iowa, and then Omaha, Nebraska, and I didn't really stop in either of those places. I stopped kind of on the outskirts of Omaha at a Starbucks to grab a coffee, and then I also stopped to take a photo because I was super impressed by the wheat and the cornfields, and I guess kind of how much it looked like Alberta or Saskatchewan, which, I haven't been to Manitoba in Canada, but I think it's directly south of that, so it kind of makes sense that the landscape would be similar to that. I guess as I was talking about yesterday, I continued to stop to take breaks regularly, between pee breaks or gas breaks or that sort of thing. And then from Omaha, I made my way down to Kansas City, and I'd planned to stop for lunch at Chipotle in Kansas City, And I'd originally found one that was on the outskirts of the city, and then I changed my mind at the sort of the last minute and was like, no, I'm going to go in the city, I'm going to check it out, I want to be able to say that I've actually been to Kansas City. So I googled the central location of Chipotle and made my way downtown, and there was a lot of construction in downtown Kansas City, which was a bit stressful, a lot of one-ways, and right where the Chipotle was, there was some sort of event going on, and the roads were closed. So I kind of drove around that square block where it was and where the road was closed for a while, and I got a little bit stressed thinking about leaving my car somewhere that was kind of on the outskirts of that area because of this event, there was no parking anywhere close. So I just made the call to continue driving and go to that original Chipotle that was outside of Kansas City. So it took me about 20 minutes longer to get there. I was starving by the time I reached Chipotle and ate. And I was pretty stressed. I think I'd worked myself up a little bit. I loved the skyline of Kansas City driving in, and I thought the city looked so cool. And then as I got downtown and started hearing like police sirens and that sort of thing, I began to freak myself out a little bit and just worry that, you know, maybe it wasn't safe, maybe it wasn't safe for me, maybe it wasn't safe to leave my car, maybe I shouldn't have done that, that was silly, like all those sorts of things. So I've had some time to process that now, and I know that, you know, most of that was me just, you know, creating stories about what could have happened in my mind, and it wasn't actually stuff that was happening because, you know, nothing did happen to me. I was completely fine. I didn't even have any sort of like scary potential situations. I just got uncomfortable with where I was and the fact that I like didn't know what I was doing and where to go and what things were like. So definitely a learning experience for me there. I was happy to eat. I love Chipotle. Although, to be honest, it really wasn't that different from Qdoba or wherever that place was that I ate previous in Sioux Falls. I just yawned. And then, so from Kansas City, I made my way, I guess by the time I got to Chipotle, it was only 3.5 hours to St. Louis. That was a bit of a tough stretch of road for me. I was listening to a really interesting audiobook, but it was a bit slower. And like I was torn because I was really interested in it, but I was also super tired. So I was like, oh, I don't want to turn it off. I'm really intrigued, but I'm like yawning a ton. So I stopped at McDonald's and grabbed a quick coffee and had a bit of a bathroom break and got some air and that sort of thing, and that seemed to help me, although it did not help me sleep. So getting coffee at 5:30 at night, just not smart, and I kind of feel like I've got a caffeine hangover today, which is fairly unideal, but that's okay. So I got the coffee about an hour out of St. Louis, and it's crazy because you get to like the city outskirts, and it's just like, I was like, oh, where's this like massive arch I've heard about? And I drove for like 20 more miles before I could even see it. And apparently you can fit 2 football fields underneath it. I was like, this is mental. So I guess like between that and Kansas City, I felt like a little nervous to be getting into Atlanta. I spent the last 14 months living in Canmore, which is a town of like 15,000 people. So significantly different in size. I guess like anything, you just learn, you know, you learn what it's like, you learn all about it, and I'm sure that I'll learn to, you know, at least enjoy Atlanta. And so getting into St. Louis, I was actually like super impressed by how beautiful it is. As you drive in, from the first time you see the skyline, I mean, it's impressive with the arch. And then from like that point onwards, as you drive in, it's like everything, or there's a lot of like brick buildings, which are super beautiful, and just a lot of like very, very cool stuff. So I had a pretty enjoyable visit in St. Louis. I got in there at about 6:30, which was like right as the sun was setting, and I kind of thought it was going to be dark by the time I got in there, and then it wasn't. So I made the call to go to the big arch. I had Googled previously where the best spot was to see the arch, and so it was from a park. I think it was called Martin Malcolm Park. So I made my way to that park, and the skyline was absolutely phenomenal. I'll put some photos on the show notes. And the sky was like orange and pink and purple, and it was just absolutely amazing. And so from there, I made my way about 20 minutes, like back the same way I'd taken to like sort of the western side of St. Louis to my Airbnb, where I kind of tucked her in for the night. And now I'm up. I've been driving for 40 minutes, and I think I've just exited St. Louis, which is pretty crazy. And I'll be passing through the states of Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Georgia today. So yeah, I'll update you later on how my drive is going. Hello and welcome back. I have been driving since 7 a.m. this morning, and it is now 1 p.m. Stopped a few times to fill up on gas and use the bathroom and stretch my legs a little bit. And I just passed through Nashville, Tennessee. So that's sort of like my biggest sort of city landmarker before I get to Atlanta, which is pretty exciting. The drive today has been pretty uneventful, I would say. I've driven from St. Louis outwards down through St. Louis kind of like borders, like it's in Missouri, but it borders Illinois. So I drove through Illinois and then a small portion of Kentucky, and then I entered Nashville, and now I'm going to finish driving through Nashville before getting to Georgia. As I'm nearing the end of the drive, I guess it's, obviously there's some emotions, there's some anxiety about what Atlanta holds for me, and excitement about finally getting there and not being in sort of this like in-between marker of my life. Driving through Nashville too. Nashville's been on my bucket list for American cities for quite a long time, so I didn't stop today. But just seeing it, I felt that excitement of like, oh my gosh, I'm like 3.5 hours from Nashville. That's amazing. And that just kind of shows me the opportunities that, living in somewhere that's so different can be. It's funny too, a couple hours ago, I saw my first Georgia state license plate, and I was like, oh, I know I'm getting near. But then I also saw a Manitoba and an Ontario license plate on trucks. So I was like, ooh, I'm not alone. I'm not the sole Canadian here. Filling up on gas. Sometimes the gas stations won't take my credit card as like prepay at the, right at the fuel thing. So I've had to go in and explain that I've got a foreign credit card and that I'm an alien in a foreign country and that sort of thing. It's been interesting though driving. I mean, it kind of started at Omaha yesterday, I guess since Omaha yesterday, the portions of this drive have been so different. So the first portion was like a lot of flatland, like a lot of small towns, not very many people. And since Omaha, I've encountered so many more people, and especially since like Kansas City, St. Louis, like these massive cities with millions and millions of people, and getting into Nashville today, like the traffic is just crazy. I mean, really feel like the need to ensure that I'm driving safe and watching the cars in front of me to make sure they're not braking. And the speed limits here aren't 130 kilometers an hour. They're more like 110. So I can definitely tell the difference between being in Montana and Wyoming and South Dakota versus being in Missouri and Tennessee. And I'm sure Georgia will continue that trend. So I think that this basically concludes my road trip podcast. I'm not sure that I'll add anything else unless something substantially interesting happens in the next 3 hours, which between the Tennessee and Georgia border, I don't really expect it to. Other than I've heard that Atlanta has crazy drivers, so I'm going to have to be on my A game with my driving. So thanks for listening. If you have any questions or comments, as always, www.theworldwanderers.com. You can always reach out to us on Facebook or Twitter at The World Wanderers. Have a great day.